For many of us, narrative-driven RPGs have been an embodied importance. For myself, I look back on how I entered this stage of my gaming hobby to reflect and ask an important question. Has the narrative and gameplay equally evolved over the years, or has it suffered? Before I can give my 2 cents on the matter, I need to go back to the very first game that got me into this genre. It happened sometime back in 2000. I was talking with a friend of mine in middle school on the way back home when he had told me he received a game for his birthday that he did not like. He insisted that I try it out, and if I liked the game I could keep it. That game would be Final Fantasy VII. Prior to this, I was only into driving games and platformers. Now I must make a note here that although driving games and platformers can measure in the same style of narrative as RPGs, it primarily evolves around its gameplay. I remember the very first time I put Final Fantasy VII into my PS1. I did not understand what I was playing. It really did not have anything going for it in terms of gameplay. Menus and pushing circle at the time seemed least involving, and once I did the first battle in the game, I decided to put the game down and pretty much never touch it again. Now I do not remember what invoked me to return to this game, but something did. It's like something with this game pulled me in. What I failed to realize back then, and what I realize now, was its narrative. The narrative in Final Fantasy VII to me, in that very first time I had played it, was deep, enriching, and overall a very satisfying experience. I had never had a feeling of sadness, experienced death of a character, nor had I experienced a villain quite like Sephiroth prior to Final Fantasy VII. It paved the way for me, and thus RPGs took center stage, alongside racing games and platformers. Final Fantasy IX, Saga Frontier, Chrono Cross, and Parasite Eve on the PS1 was such grand experiences. Fantasy away from reality is what I got from them, and Final Fantasy IX had introduced me into a classic style feel of Final Fantasy that I would later on experience. Parasite Eve, although did not introduce me to horror style games, that would be Resident Evil 2, still introduced me to the idea of a horror style narrative in a role-playing game. All of this was deepening my love for the genre. However, gameplay was changing for me. It went from controlling cars in Need for Speed 3 to controlling character stats and leveling up, solving puzzles and exploring new worlds. I cannot get over this change, and for me it was overwhelming. However, one thing plagued my thoughts. Has the narrative and gameplay equally evolved over the years, or has it suffered? So, I picked a few games out of this list to discuss with you guys. I wanted to pick some games that gave an example of great narrative and great gameplay. Maybe ones that had really good focus on gameplay but not so much focus on its narrative, or some that completely fell flat on its face. So, with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at our very first game on the list. My first example would be Eternal Sonata. This game tried to incorporate a master composer named Frederick Chopin, a classic artist from past history, written into an action-style RPG with heavy emphasis on his music, while trying to teach some history on this particular person. Its gameplay was none short of disappointing. Combat allowed players to dodge in real time against enemies, while at the same time being very strategic. Characters could learn amazing abilities, which in turn, as the story progressed, the gameplay evolved even more with new and ever-changing combat that pretty much made every section of the gameplay feel fresh and new. While I am praising the gameplay to an extent, I'm not mentioning much of the storyline. This is because the story is really a letdown. I do feel that Chopin, while being a great composer, in the end does not warrant a good character to be used in a video game. Not only him, but others in the game feel bland and lifeless. It's hard to say that the story felt lackluster would be an understatement, but it was not well executed. At some point in the story, it got really convoluted as to what was really going on, other than Chopin being in a dream world. While I thoroughly enjoyed Eternal Sonata's gameplay, I did not, however, enjoy the storyline. This is one example of disappointing storytelling, but great gameplay. This one was a tough choice for me because out of all the choices I could have picked from, this one I felt deserved to be picked, and that is Persona 4 Golden. Persona 4, originally released back in 2009, received a ton of praise. When the PS Vita version was announced, I could not pass up on replaying this game. The writing in Persona 4 brings a group of high school students together on a quest to solve a murder-style mystery in their hometown of Inaba. Solving murders is one thing, but also trying to figure out what the Midnight Channel is could be an interesting topic in its own right. All of the important stuff when fleshing out a good story is there. It's entertaining when it happens, such as when they go on a camping trip and the food is terrible because the girls cooked it for them, or when Dejima talks with the main character. You feel as though you can relate to such events. One main thing that really involved player interaction was its social links. This allowed the main character to evolve its personas even more through character interactions, via supporting characters in a time of crisis, or just hanging out with them. Not only was this important and unique to the gameplay experience, but even as far as going out to eat and working in the game also played an important role in unlocking side story content, but it made it possible to even unlock other optional boss fights. With this level of interactive storytelling, what more could you ask for? Gameplay, of course, and with Persona 4, it does just that. It's funny because Persona 4 uses a rogue dungeon style system, which means it's constantly evolving and never the same for each player. This pretty much makes each experience new and refreshing. Alongside this, you have your cast to level up and control in a turn-based style setting. With so much added content packed into a cartridge, Persona 4 Golden utilizes what few JRPGs have previously. That is why I felt that in both gameplay and storytelling, Persona 4 Golden does both equally well. There is one last game that I need to mention because when I reviewed it, the company Hitmaker had just closed its doors. That game would be Last Rebellion. Last Rebellion came out around 2010 with an overall negative reception. Its storytelling lacked care, and its characters were very bland and not likable. The story centers around death, revenge, and sharing one body with two spirits. It tries to play its story out through portrait cutscenes, but in the end fails to captivate the audience to want more from it. With its limited character interaction, it's no wonder it never felt evolving. Its basis of a world filled with death to me seems to be this reason. However, because of poor storytelling and lack of characters in the story, really drags down the importance of what makes an RPG entertaining. Gameplay is no small feat either, but for Last Rebellion, you would notice that other than it being a turn-based RPG, it only has one character that you control with another spirit in the body who you swap from, and that's all you will see through the entire game. Makes the combat very lackluster. How can one character for gameplay be fun, especially in a RPG setting? Only relying on one guy to do most of the work is pretty sad. This is why Last Rebellion, in my honest opinion, felt that its gameplay and narrative suffered equally. These were just a few examples of narrative and gameplay, and a question that I asked in the very beginning of the video was, how do I feel narrative and gameplay has evolved over time? Since the original first game that I ever played in this genre was Final Fantasy VII, games have definitely evolved from its graphical point of view, to its narrative movie style point of view, to its gameplay. And in some cases, with some particular series of games, they haven't evolved too much, while others have completely driven itself either in a good direction or a bad direction, depending on the person who likes a certain game. Now, for me, I don't really think it's gotten worse. I think it really comes down to the developer, and it comes down to the person who's playing the game. For myself, I look for an equal narrative and gameplay. I would like it to go hand in hand because I feel like if I'm getting best of both worlds, I'm going to get more out of this game. Now, there are many people out there, such as people who like to get a completionist run, those who want to finish the game on a high note with everything done to the best of their ability. Then there are some who want a really good narrative. I mean, even if the gameplay is faulty, they can still enjoy the narrative for what it was. And then there are those who really want good gameplay experiences, even if the storyline is very limited and doesn't have a lot going for it. If that gameplay aspect, such as Bloodborne as a good example, has a really driving gameplay experience, that is the key. And those kind of things you have to look for, whether it be Fallout New Vegas, whether it be games such as Bloodborne, or games such as Persona, or games like Neptune or Disgaea. All of those games have something that interests a certain player, and when you find that happy medium, that is where you have to answer that question for yourself. And I think with that, I will leave you guys to answer that question of a question that I asked in the very beginning of the video. So thanks guys for joining me right here on my video of narrative and gameplay, the future of RPGs. I'm Forrest, and I will talk to you guys later.